If you fly fish for smallmouth bass, there's a very good chance that you have a well-stocked, well-used, well-loved wallet or box filled with surface patterns. Bugs, poppers, sliders are not only effective, but they're some of the most fun ways that you can chase fish, period. But you know as well as I do that using these alone will get you stuck in a rut. And the book that kind of keyed me into this is the title we'll talk about today on Casting Across. Hi, I'm Matthew of castingacross.com, where I explore the quarry and culture of fly fishing. I grew up in Northern Virginia, and some of my earliest fly fishing took place out in the Shenandoah Valley. And I fished for brook trout up on the mountainsides, and down in the rivers, I chased smallmouth bass. And I approached these fish in one of two ways. The first one was I would take the bass bugs I was using at the subdivision ponds back home and simply cast those out into fast water and retrieve them and hope for a strike. The other one was I would take my trout fly box, find the biggest streamers, throw it into deep pools, retrieve it, and hope for a strike. Now, to be fair, both of these approaches worked and still work, but it wasn't until I picked up the book we're talking about today that I saw kind of the bigger picture of smallmouth bass fishing, and I gave them the attention that they deserved. It's Fly Fishing for Smallmouth Bass by Harry Murray, who is a Virginia guy. A couple of interesting things about this book. First and foremost, it is over 35 years old. But that's okay. The only kind of information that you need to translate in your head has to do with gear, just some advances that's come along in gear, both in what's out there and how it is used. And secondly, in fly patterns. Of course, fly patterns that have been developed in the last 35 years are not in this book. But again, the techniques used and the general styles of flies are the same. But this book is incredibly helpful for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it teaches you how to prospect for smallmouth bass. And doing so is kind of like a hybrid between trying to find trout in a river and fishing for largemouth bass. That's an overgeneralization, but it's the best way that I can explain it. And it's kind of some of the ways that Murray approaches the topic in this title. He does a great job of talking through in the diverse conditions you can find smallmouth, where to look for them. So that's the first thing. The second thing is he gives due to each variety of fly pattern style. So obviously you're talking about topwater flies, but he breaks that down, the difference between more traditional flies for smallmouth and poppers, and how there may be times where approaching fish on the surface requires the finesse of a dead drifted bug versus a aggressively stripped popper. That is incredibly helpful, and it's not something that necessarily comes intuitively as you're out on the river chasing these fish. He talks about streamers, but he also talks about nymphs, and this was the big eye-opener for me, was fly fishing for smallmouth bass with nymphs. You can dead drift a nymph just like you would for trout. You can also fish like a hopper-dropper style approach for trout, and fishing for smallmouth bass with nymphs really kind of improved my confidence when I was chasing trout with nymphs as I was a young angler. And it's an incredibly effective way to chase smallmouth bass. But then he also talks about shrimps, which is a variety of fly, which is kind of a hybrid between a nymph and a streamer. And it's really cool because you can fish it two completely different ways on two consecutive casts. But Murray does a really good job of being succinct in explaining it. I mean, it's a relatively short book with a lot of illustrations and pictures. And if you've ever met Murray at his fly shop, you know he's kind of a succinct and to-the-point guy. And if you've never been to his fly shop and you find yourself going down I-81 in Virginia, do so. Because I imagine you've never been to a fly shop that is also a working pharmacy before. But this is a great book, worth picking up if you are interested in fly fishing for smallmouth bass. It will give you all of the general information and a lot of kind of situation specific information that you would ever need. And if you have been catching a lot of fish on smallmouth, this is the kind of book you can pick up, and it will fill in some gaps in what your experience is and what your techniques and approaches might be. There's other good books on smallmouth out there. Bob Clauser's is another stalwart. Jake Vilwalk has one that's only a couple years old that's a really good book. But this was my first exposure to kind of the serious discipline of fly fishing for smallmouth bass and giving these fish the serious consideration they deserve. Do you have a favorite approach for smallmouth? On the top, in the middle, or bouncing on the bottom? Let me know in the comments below. And then head over to castingacross.com for 3 posts a week on the people, places, and things that go into the pursuit of fish.